Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to the next session in your oil lessons. Um, we've got an interesting one this time. We're going to be looking at clouds. Uh, and it's one of those things that, a lot of people paint clouds and during the time that they're painting, especially if you're into landscapes and things. So, and of course, there are different types of clouds, but it's it's a good excuse, if you like, to use our little system that we've developed, which I hope you're trying out, which is STEM, STEM. Okay, looking at shape first, then tone, then edges, and then other marks, surface marks, if you like. But the first three STE are the ones, hopefully, that give you the main structure, which is shape, tone, and edges. So just to refresh your memory on that, when we're looking at an object, try and break it down into the types of shapes that we see within it. Are they rounded, curvy shapes? Are they angular shapes? Are they patterns? Or, what type of shapes? How would you describe them? Then look at the tones. Try to say, if that shape there is a very dark color, dark gray, let's say, is the one beside it much, much lighter, or is it just slightly lighter? Are they all very similar in tone? Or are they all very, very different, and so on? Then you get to the E, edges, where those tones meet, where those shapes meet with different tones. Are they crisp, hard edges, just side by side, or do they blend together? And if they do blend together, how much? They might blend a little bit, so you might get a slightly blurred line, or they might blend so subtly that it's almost impossible to see where one ends and one begins. And if you begin with that pattern, then you can create a lot of things in your painting. So obviously clouds are interesting because they're constantly moving, and the edges, sometimes feel as if they don't have structure. So this should be an interesting one to look at. What I'm doing, hopefully, is bringing up one cloud, just a very much a classic example of sort of cloud that we tend to think about when we're drawing and painting and whatever. And what I want to do is just point out, go through those words. Um, this cloud is fairly high key. In other words, it's quite a bright cloud, really. But if we were to look at the shapes, okay, let's start with that S again. I'm just moving my thing across here, and we'll just click here, and so I can draw. So I'll use a dark line, obviously, so you can hopefully see it. But let's look at what shapes. We could arguably say, look, there, you watch my little gray line. There's the edge of a cloud going around like that, okay? And they going around and creating a shape like that. And we might say, okay, I see a shape there. And again, when you get these photographs, you can have a look yourselves. You might see shapes I don't, and all sorts. But there's a shape that I think is a one-off. And then if I follow the edge of this down, I sort of see a shape there, slightly different. Then there's a little darker shape here, gray sort of shape. You could say perhaps it continues on in there, along here, up there, look, to there. And if you look beside that, you'll see hopefully a slightly darker tone. So that's why I am going to call that a different shape. Okay, there. And then we'll just include that little shape at the end there and call it a separate one. And let's say, okay, we'll follow this shape round. But at this point, there's a change. So that all of that area bounded by my line there is roughly the same brightness. But beside it, the brightness is slightly less. So let's just say we'll call that another shape. So if you see what I've been trying to do here, if you look inside each of those shapes, you'll see a slightly different tone. Now, within those tones, there are very subtle changes. I know that. But as a basis, look for the biggest areas and generalize them and say, well, generally that's all really, really, very, very light. And generally, that's all mid-tone. Generally, that's a bit darker, and so on. And in fact, really, as I look at that, it might be that I say that shape, call that number 1 shape and number 2 shape. They could nearly be the same, to be honest, if you really want to. But if we, label them, and say, look, there is a jigsaw puzzle of different tones, or, tones which are different to each other, side by side. And there we analyze, if you like, the shape. Now, what I'm going to do is undo all this. Hopefully back to the start. And let's look at some of the edges without the line, without me drawing the boundary lines. Let's look at the edges. First of all, what I'll actually do really is I'll circle, actually. That's what I'll do, circle an example for you. This area here, within this little circle, where this light area to the left meets the darker area, I beg your pardon, to the right meets the darker area to the left. We know there are 2 tones there. We know there's division, if you like, but look at the edges, and if let's bring that up bigger. So look at the gradation. There is a blur, so the edge is soft, but it's not disappearing to the point where we can't see a sort of a line, if you know what I mean. We could, like I've just done, draw a line down there, because I can tell that that's where that pretty much ends. But there's a few bits of the white, or rather light, feather their way over, so there's a wee bit of blending. And likewise, if we circle that, you see there's a little bit of blending there. And if we circle this, and you'll notice that some of them have different amounts of blending. So, I mean, there's a transition from light to darker, which is very soft, very gentle. Whereas if I take this area, you see just there, where the light on the left and the slightly darker on the right, you can see the edge a wee bit more crisply. But all of them blend to some extent or another, but they're all variations of that. Now, what I don't want you to worry about is becoming obsessed with every single wrinkle in this cloud. What we've done earlier there, as you saw, we split it into, I think, 7 bits. So to begin with, that gives us a start. We can then go in, and when we talk about the M in STEM, that word, marks, think of that being the smaller, more intricate surface marks on things that come after you've got the big bit, if you know what I mean. So again, if we look at the cloud and we imagine it split into these big areas here, there's a big area of slightly darker gray, there's a lighter gray. Within that, look at all these wispy bits. So rather than seeing them as all individual shapes, because we could be here for a lifetime doing it, we'll add those in on top once we get the structure done. And I'll bring this out a bit more. Likewise, if we were to look at the edges of the actual cloud itself, look at the edges along, some of the edges are quite crisp along here. And then some of them feather out a wee bit. So there's some broken edges and some are a bit crisper that it's hard to see. They look quite strong. Some are ghostly and feathery, smoky, if you like. So by doing this exercise, we've analyzed what we're looking at. And what you can do before doing your own exercise, you can, if you want, well, you should probably take the photos that I've sent you, even print them off and literally draw on them, So, a bit like I'm doing here, I'm drawing, splitting that up into bits there, and I see that as a shape there, and draw the shapes. And then when you come to paint it, you can literally follow these shapes and occupy them. Well, that's a very, very light gray, that's a slightly darker gray, and so on. So that's the next thing I'm going to be doing in the demo. So, but hopefully that introduction will encourage you to break things down the way we mentioned. So I'll just come back for a second. Hopefully that will give you a start. Please analyze the pictures before you try that. That's the whole purpose of the exercise. What I'm going to do now is we'll have a look at some other clouds, and then I'll start to paint. So what we're going to do very quickly now is have a look at a couple of different types of cloud. So I'm going to bring these up now. There you go. And this gives me a great excuse to use the words that I loved using when I was in school, which is cirrus and cumulus and cumulonimbus. I absolutely love doing that in school with geography for some reason. I think the words were so impressive that when I came home, I remember coming home to my mom and dad and being able to say, you know, we were doing about learning about cumulonimbus clouds today, and the words had this great intellectual sound to them, you know, that, oh, that's very clever, you know, what's, you know, cumulonimbus and cirrocumulus and things like that, and it gave me great pleasure for some reason. But anyway, we're now applying all this to art rather than meteorology. So on the left here, different type of cloud to the one we've looked at a moment ago when we broke down. And if I'll enlarge this as well, try to blow this up and go across this cirrus cloud here. There, I'm using those words again, see that? If we were looking at shapes here, there's a different thing going on, but there are shapes. We could still think of shapes existing. So if, for example, I take my little pen here and think, okay, generally look what we've got streaks, we've got linear sort of shapes. So in other words, we could say, well, you know, if we took the edges of that and that, you know, we could say there's a shape. We could say there's a shape there. Look at this sausage shape here. There's another little shape we could bound the edges. It's for wispy, but it has got edges. There's maybe another shape along the edge of that one, and so on. So and this little one, if we wanted to, we could say, well, there's a little shape there. So we can kind of simplify shapes just as we did before. So we'll just undo that. But the difference here is when we come to the tones and edges, there are different tones. You can see, for example, if I take an area around here, there's quite a light there. And if you look over to the next area beside it here, there's a very subtle difference. There's a very subtle difference in tone. This one here is very bright. This one, number 2, is slightly darker, you know. So there are differences. Now, we can do that in blocks if we want, or we could do it in streaks. But to stick to our plan, if you like, what we'll do is we'll think of it as blocks. But then when we come to the edges, that's where we really give the characteristic of this object here, this cloud. The edges, of course, are extremely soft. So there's a lot of blending going on here. And they're so soft that they're see-through. So we see into the blue below them. So in this case, what we're going to do is make the paint transparent for the purposes of this exercise. Then if we look over here, this is kind of a nice cloud because of the drama of it, you know, because you have the light behind it. And again, it's not the greatest photograph, to be honest with you, but on screen it's a wee bit pixelated. But again, if we were drawing, we would say, you know, follow my little gray. I'll make it a lighter gray so maybe you can see it better. Round the edges there, you have this little strip of light just along there. And it's quite crisp, actually, you know, but you have a little ribbon of light. Then in here, you have another area which is slightly darker. Then you have an area here, look, it's really darker. Then you have an area there. So we can, again, bound certain areas. And then after that, we think of tone. The tones are very close, but not, you know, they're very, very close, but are slightly different. But this is going to be very important to get that into the picture, because what you need is the drama of the light. So there's another different type of cloud. So we're using the same method, no matter what, to try and break these clouds down. And what we'll do now is start to paint and see how we can get that going, okay? Okay, so what I have here laid out is simply another sheet of relatively cheap watercolor paper, which has been primed 2 or 3 times with a white acrylic and then just stained across, you can see here, with a gray. slightly thinned acrylic paint. You could do this in oils, of course. Just takes a little longer to dry, so it's really up to yourself. I'm just doing it for convenience for this demonstration, really. If you remember back then, also what I've got to work with, I'm at the moment anyway, is my little flat, soft nylon brush here. I think it's around about centimeter wide, not massive, but you can see them against my thumbnail there. Then I have my similarly wide filbert brush, the one that has a rounded top, straight edges, you can see against my thumbnail. And then I have a small filbert brush here, which I'm going to use, you see again, a round top, flat edges. But again, relatively small, I think number 2 or number 3, it's on the edge of it there. And also I may at some point work with this rounded brush. I think it's number 12 or 13, 14 or something. Again, you can see reasonable size, round but soft, again, soft nylon brush. Nice front end to it there, you can see nice rounded pattern. So we have that. I'm simply using black and white paint for this exercise. There we go, a palette, some black and white on it, and a little dish with a tiny little bit of, in my case I'm using liquid, but again, tiny little bit of turpentine is enough for this exercise. Don't need linseed or anything like that. What I'm going to do this time, unlike the last time or the last videos, previous videos, where I had been kind of drawn with pencil and so on, and then I thought it might be kind of nice just to draw with my small filbert brush. So because I've got a grey background, I can maybe initially draw with white here, so you can see. And normally I would draw with a brush, to be honest, when I'm painting myself, because I feel that I'm painting right away. You know, that it feels like painting rather than drawing and colouring in, but it depends on what you're doing, I guess. What I'm looking at is the photograph here, and we analysed it to some extent earlier on there, and we talked about shapes. So I'm going to have a look at the shapes, and I said, well, we know that the shapes are crinkly, and we're going to deal with this in detail later on, but let's get at least the feel of the cloud here, you know. It's coming out a little bit there and going back in. Just load up with a wee bit more white paint. Dilute it slightly. I have with a little liquid on there. And you can see the sort of crinkly marks I'm making. And this is not necessarily going to be the shape that it's going to be at the end, but it's just a reminder of the type of quality I would like in this little cloud. It's kind of coming down that way. And remember what I said before, for the exercises that you're going to try, please don't get overly anxious about, you know, oh, it's exactly the same shape as a cloud. What we want to learn is about how to create something that has the surfaces and the illusion of clouds and materials. Okay, so, you know, I know that I'm sure my drawing here is not the most accurate, but you know, it will suffice for this exercise. Then what I'm going to do, if you remember, we tried to identify shapes. So I'm just having a look again as I'm speaking here, and I'm sort of thinking, well, I can see a shape there, and some of you will see different shapes possibly, but you can see that little area there. It's like a map, actually. If you think about it, it looks like a map of somewhere. Then I'm seeing a darker tone coming down here, all the way down there, and it kind of bounds an area about there. So the little section there, which leaves this section, we'll leave that as a separate section. Then up here, there's a very light little area right there. Then there's a little bit dark beside it, and then there's another light area around here, and so on. Now, you can, maybe the more you do these exercises, the more you might say, well, instead of drawing the boundaries first, just go in and block them in as you go. So don't feel obliged that you have to go through this, especially if you've been doing a couple of these previously and you feel more confident, you know. So I've created this little map And what I'm just simply going to do now is work from dark to light. So I'm going to begin with what I believe are the darker greys in here. And again, we want to get fairly well in there, but don't panic if it's exactly that tone. And another exercise, yes, I would be asking you to do that, but for this exercise, it's not so critical. So we'll occupy this area that we said was very dark. And it doesn't have to be super neat because we're going to work it together. Then I'm going to look up and have an area which is slightly, well, a little bit lighter than that, which is down here. So I'm going to put a lighter area in that area. And the paint isn't particularly thick, by the way. You might hear the brush, so I'm not putting on a big ladles of paint at all. And while I have that color, I'm looking for other areas actually. Well, there's this mid area up here of mid-tone. Let's call it mid-tone. Just getting a little bit more on the brush there. I'll let that continue down there actually. And then actually I missed out a couple of little darker tones, so I'm going to put those in. See a little bit of darker patch in that area. And I think I had a little darker patch somewhere down here. This might be a bit too dark, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. And then let's work out to the very lightest, or very light, not necessarily the lightest. And not pure white, by the way. It's a very light grey. But I'm trying to avoid going full on to absolute white quite at the minute anyway, because it often doesn't exist anyway in nature. So now we've got some nice light flashes up here, there, and you notice that in some respects we're losing the outline a bit because of the way I'm brushing it, but that's okay. We're going to go back to all of this. We're just at the minute establishing the obvious areas of different tone that we can see, we feel we can see. And then there's this nice little area coming out in there, sticking out at the end there. And I don't want to get too fussy. It's one of my problems. I start to see more and more detail and get a bit carried away. But at the moment, let's live with that. And what I'm going to do, what we might have to do shortly, is actually occupy a little background deep in the background. So before blending this will stay wet, because that grey and that grey are so alike. Let's give it a chance to work. So I'm making up a slightly darker grey, quite a darker actually. I'm going to go around this. You can hear that it is really very thin. So just to see if we can let the light shine through. And again, don't be worried about the edges being overwhelmed, because we're going to change the edges, and the edges are going to be softer probably anyway. So I'm just really doing that so that this comes forward a little bit for us, and work our way around. And this flat brush, which is, as I say, maybe just slightly more than a centimeter broad, it's relatively, it might feel or look relatively big, but because it's flat, you can create lovely, see, like crisp lines. You can get in actually just as well as you could perhaps with a wee tiny thin round brush that some people tend to use. And surprisingly, a big brush sometimes is capable of more detail than a small brush. But let's say we kill that off there for the moment, just to subdue that lighter grey. And then with that same brush at the moment anyway, what I'm going to do is, you can see I'm cleaning pretty much everything off it and going back to a method that we've used before, which is the blending. So we came to edges. We said the edges were soft, and obviously when you look at your photograph, they're very, very soft. So let's merge those edges with this nice soft flat brush. Again, if you remember, working crisscross marks so that we're not necessarily always working in the same direction. working through that, wiping. Yeah, of course, that's the most important thing too. Just dabbing and tapping and merging these together. Wiping again. So we lose the darkest of the darks because we're sort of carrying the paint across, and we'll lose the lightest of the lights as well, probably because we're carrying a little bit dark in there. But I'm working around the edges of each shape until they kind of merge, you know. So what happens is they no longer almost become definite shapes, so it's hard to say, oh, that's a shape and that's a shape, but that's exactly what we want. We started with shapes as our basis, and we're working in and around them, and all we want to do is avoid merging them to the point where they goes into one shade, then we lose the form. So, you know, just keep a balance there and work that around there. You see that never leaves my hand, that tissue, that kitchen roll, because I want to constantly remove the paint off the brush as I blend it. I'll work around there. Let's get up in here and push that around, push that up into that a wee bit. Not stroking long, just tap. And you can see that what happens is we're creating some sort of a form, you know. There's a sort of volume beginning to happen with this cloud now, you know. It has a feeling that it might have 3 dimensions, but it's still relatively simple shapes. Keep wiping that. And don't worry, as I said before, because we lose some of the extreme darks and lights, we can replace those. But this is a method whereby at least what we're doing is creating something that has curvature and volume. And there's a feeling perhaps now that the light is coming from the top perhaps and from the side and so on. And then what we can do, if we wish, we can begin to refine this. What I mean by that is we talk about edges. Well, obviously the edges I have here are still quite crisp. So we can begin to blur those edges. If you look at the edges, they're quite crinkly. And it might even be that first of all we go back with this little small filbert brush and just crinkle up the edges. So we're now on the E of our word edge. You know, we've dealt with shapes and tones. We're now trying to, so I'm not getting over fussy. I'm just saying let's make it a serrated edge or a broken edge here around the top, and we know that that's light. You know, there seems to be the lightest bits are at the top here. This is not quite pure white, but close, you know, because I know when I start to work with this, it'll get darker because I'm going to be merging other tones from other parts of the picture and a little bit sticking out here and so on. So it looks a bit rough, for the want of a better word, down here. Let's make that grey down here a little less light. Maybe more of a grey here, look. But likewise, crinkly, dotty, fairly random looking. Sticking right out here and there, sometimes not sticking right out. And as we come across here, it starts to get a bit lighter again. It seems to anyway. A couple of bits sticking across. So I'm making the whole edge tufty and rugged. And as we've done before, we then go in and refine that. So we can leave this down, and we can either use our flat brush here, or maybe this might be the time to experiment with this nice soft round brush. So we can just go in. I'm not going in head on like I'm stabbing. I'm just going slightly at an angle, but I'm not going that way either. So it's high angle, and just ever so lightly, I'm barely touching the edges here. Again, wiping. Just wiping around. Wipe again. Back and forward. Not too much movement. Okay. Wiping constantly. Keeping the direction changing as well is not a bad idea. Changing the direction because it keeps the ruggedness of it, or the featheriness of it, more interesting. So up here, wipe, tap, right on the edge, right where it meets the background. Tap again. You might want to say, well, let's let that come out a little bit more, possibly. Just keep working that. Working that. And we can create a nice softer feeling to these edges. Now, this might be interesting because the big brush has given me this lovely soft quality to the edge, but in a sense, I think that the edge might have more crinkliness than that. So maybe I've gone too far. So I'm going to go back with this little brush and try to use it in a similar way. So I'm going to go back in. This time, same technique, tapping gently, wiping, tapping, wiping. So this time I'm blending the paint with this little brush rather than, as we did earlier, putting it on. And you can see that what I'm getting is a softer edge. The first time I drew it, it was always hard, crinkly. But because now the brush is not putting paint on, it's actually blending paint, then the marks are different. And I'm creating a different illusion, if you like. And we can tidy up the inside in due course, don't worry about that. But for the moment, we're talking about the edges, the outer edges, if you like. And we can create that, say, wiping all the time. Occasionally the steam or whatever from the cloud just feathers out a little bit further there. And we can work all the way around until we're a bit happier with the sort of illusion going along here and so on. Let's get this wee bit here, over here. Kind of maybe a wee bit hard, but so the small brush actually is working quite nicely for this. But the method is the same, tapping, wiping, blending to the point where it creates some illusion of these crinkly sort of clouds, okay? So we can keep doing that. And then, again, because I'm doing this as a, if you like, a demonstration, I'm trying to include the different points, get the points across, you know, fairly quickly. But you could either let this dry before you do the next bit, or what we'll do is we'll try to work on, because one of the next word that we talked about was the M, the marks. So we could say, look, we've got the beginning of a cloud structure, but within it there are smaller marks. If you look at your photograph, you'll see little tufts of cloud and whatever. So while we even are using this little brush, I'm trying to look, I'm seeing a little mark there. I'm just putting it down. I'm not trying to draw out a particular shape. I'm just putting a dot of white down there. There's actually quite a light bit there, so we'll stick a wee bit there. I think there's a wee bit over here. Stick about there. Not too much, you know. And then here, because we have lost some of the light in the previous piece of blending. So you can see where I'm putting all these bits here. There's another little highlight, not highlight, but light area here, maybe here, and out there again, okay? So you can apply those and then go back in. This time I might go back to my flat brush because it might be kind of nice just to make these less specific. So again, just lightly tapping the edges of this, because this time we don't want to lose the lightness completely, otherwise we're kind of back to square one. So I'm just working around the edges of those light areas that I applied, wiping, removing a little bit, wiping, merging it in until we just leave a glow there in that particular area. Moving across here, just tapping that around, wipe, tap until the edges disappear into the rest of the cloud, as they do. And the same here, let me merge that. You can see the flatness. I'm using the brush at a very flat angle wiping. It only takes 2 or 3 strokes to pick up an awful lot of paint, so that's why you have to wipe so frequently with it. But you can see now we're getting some information starting to happen in the center area of the cloud as well. And we're just working it up. Wipe, remove, wipe, remove, but not too much. And over here, wipe, remove. Take that out a wee bit, just let's see if it feathers out into the kind of the background, the sky or whatever. Tidy this bit up. So now we're getting some other aspects of the cloud here. Maybe we can then just work our way around it, merging the bits that maybe look a bit harsh. So we can merge and then apply and merge and apply and so on until we get to a point where we have more structure to the thing, you know, and putting a wee bit more light on there, wiping the brush, and then just pulling it in, tap, tap. I use that word tap so much, I realize when I look back in the videos, I think people are sick of me using the word tap, tap, or taps or whatever. It's a little bit of a glow down here actually, so let's put a little light along there. Wipe again, and tap, believe it or not. Just merge that, but we wipe. Be careful not to lift it all away, because you lose that lovely light, feeling of light that was just catching the underside of this bit of cloud, and let that merge. So we're getting a little sliver of glow coming up underneath that cloud. Just going back over some of the bits that are maybe need merged a bit more. So keeping moving your brush around, pulling one into another, wiping, lifting a little bit of the light, pulling it down in a bit of the dark, pushing it back and forward, but knowing when to stop before you lose the definition. And probably that's one of the most difficult things, because if we stop concentrating, we realize we've been tapping to the point where we have lost it completely. And what I'm gonna risk putting a little bit of a deeper tone in here, just to see just around this edge here, because there's a sort of a strange thing going on in that. So that's again just a lump of dark grey, and this time I'm going to begin the merging process, wiping and merging across this way. And it takes time, but keep doing this, and this is where you create genuine illusion of structure. You know that the cloud now has feelings that it's got shadow going up underneath there, and so on. There are very few super quick fixes in painting, and that is sometimes a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, including myself. But it is true that we just have to take that time, clean the brush, just merge that together so it's not too harsh. Clean the brush again, drag that a wee bit softer maybe than it was, just bit into that. So again, I'm at the point where that description of brushing dust off the Ming vase, you know, and there's a little bit of depth around there. So there seems to be a shadow beneath this cloud, you know, and light more at the top. So we'll try and create that. But this all began, if you like, from the drawing of shapes and the merging of shapes, and then we're beginning to refine those that little bit more now into our final sort of structure. But you can see that the cloud has volume, The edges do have that form, but they're still slightly feathery. This here, you know, maybe merge that out a wee bit more. Soften the edge of that a bit more, because I don't like it sticking out like that so much. I don't think it needs to. Wipe again, and just know when to stop, and so on. So we're beginning to get a solid cloud at this point. What I've decided to do, as you can see here, I've just decided to make this surrounding area blue rather than grey. I think it helps with the illusion overall, you know, to have a sky colour. So what I've done is, you can see where I've put blue around the outside, I think it's a cobalt blue, maybe some white, but it's not quite touching the cloud. And what I'm going to attempt to do then is use this blending method that we talked about to merge the sky and the cloud together around the edges. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm actually using the flat edge like a knife going down the side of the flat brush. So you can see now, you know, the colors are getting merged a little bit, but I'm not going to be too concerned. The main thing is that I'm working right up with the corner of this flat brush. But also when we meet the cloud, I'm just tapping slightly to create that softness there. So I'm doing that. Sorry, I'm just getting some more paint on the brush. So I'm actually using a little bit of blue paint on the brush. So I'm working from the blue towards the cloud rather than the cloud out towards the blue. So I'm using blue paint rather than grey paint. And coming in there, very little paint on the brush, you know, in here. And then what I'm doing is I'm going to wipe the brush now, and likewise, like we've done before, I should say, just on the corner of the brush, tap, tap, tap. There's that word tap again. And merge that in. And we probably will have to go back and pull the grey back over it. So in other words, we might need to bring the cloud out. So at the minute what I'm doing is bringing the sky in, but going over the cloud slightly, but lightly. And it's the light touch that I can't emphasize enough around here, because we want the thing to look like it's feathering off into the sky. So now what I'll do is just clean that brush, and again this time go just halfway between the grey and the blue, and I might even use some light grey again just to repaint the edges, but softly. So it's all about the blending now, wipe, tapping and so on all the way around there. Turning the brush, rotating the brush so that my marks aren't exactly the same all the way around, so that it helps to give us sort of a more natural feel of how clouds dissipate and bleed out into the sky, you know, because they're basically like steam, I suppose, you know. So around there, white brush, work around there, get a little bit more lumpy qualities to that, maybe along the top there. Wipe again, and we keep doing that all the way around until we create a halfway blended, halfway sort of house with the cloud. And then what we can do is re-establish that. So get back into our little small filbert that we used earlier, a little bit of light paint on that. And now what I'm going to do is just repaint the slightly more crinkly quality to that, and wipe and tap again, back to the same method there. Just work that, and it gets much more smaller marks now, because I want to retain the shape. If I make big marks, I'll lose the edge, because the cloud does have an edge. So whilst it's feathery, it still seems to have a you know, a sharp-ish sort of edge. So I'm going to work a bit around here and here, again cleaning and merging slightly against the blue this time rather than the grey, and that's given us a wee bit more definition, I think, around the edges. Tapping, wipe, highly sort of intense activity to get this, but you can see, I hope, how that's beginning to create the crinkliness again of the cloud at the top. So just wiggle that a wee bit more and keep moving around until we create that all the way across. It might change tone now and again. I'm using fairly light paint at the minute, but hopefully you can see how that top edge of the cloud is beginning to happen. And again, we can just merge that, just soften the inner part and leave the outer part more distinctive or distinct until we work all the way around the cloud itself. And this, of course, is only one type of cloud, and this is the thing where we'll maybe talk about there's so many other types. Now what I'm doing is, with that little clean brush again, just tidying up those very squiggly marks, but not too much. I wanted to feel lumpy. And in fact, we can, as I'm looking at the picture, I see that there's little bits of lumps in the inside too. So maybe keep this wiggly technique going for the moment. And this is where the word marks come in, the M. After we get the structure and after we get the tones established in some way and the edges feathered together, then what other sort of mark can we make to help the illusion? And in this case, what I'm saying is maybe what we do is make a few more patchy marks in the middle, and that is where, if you like, we get what we might call more detail into the image. A little bit dark up here, so you can see the way I'm making my marks to try and suit the subject. If this was a leaf or an apple like we've looked at, you notice it was a different sort of mark we made, but they were made from different material. So this is a soft curly whirly sort of object, so perhaps soft and curly whirly marks are the way to get it to work. So you can see that all the way through now. So I'm actually merging the tones with a particular type of mark, and we're getting that sort of thing to happen as well. And again, just maybe feather out the bottom edges a little bit more there. But hopefully you can see how we can create some structures within clouds using the method that we've talked about. Now what we can do, just as an experiment as a matter of interest, is change the nature of this cloud by changing the shape, the tone, the edges, and so on, those words again. And as we change those, we change the quality of the object, just a bit like we did, I think, with the rocks. So what I've got is my good old soft round brush here. And I'm just thinking, let's merge the tones even more. In other words, the edges become even softer than they are at the minute. And also the edges of the outer edges. So in other words, let's soften the edges, and in doing so, merge the tones. So just with this brush here, I'm just taking and tapping it, wiping, and so back to this method, merging, and there might be a little bit of blue on that brush, but actually that might be quite nice. But just, you can see what I'm doing. I'm teasing, so we're losing the defined edges here. Tapping away, wiping, so on. And you can see now the nature of this cloud is changing right away. And we're only working in the center area at the minute. We haven't got to the outer edges, which we will in a second. And you can see now that it's a softer cloud, obviously. And now, pardon me, I'm knocking the camera there. What I'm going to do is I'm rotating the brush. I don't know if you can see my twirling my thumb and finger like that as I go. So as I work up and down, tapping, I'm also twirling. You see that movement with my hands? Back and forward. Clean the brush again, right? On the edge here. Now obviously the cloud's going to maybe get a little bit bigger because we're stretching it out, but just to let you see. Wipe. Work all the way down the bottom here. Wipe. Wipe. I probably need to wipe these quite frequently because I'm dabbing so much that I'm picking quite a lot of paint up off the canvas or the board here. But you can see now that we've destroyed that crinkly type of cloud that you get and created one of those clouds that begins to sort of almost disappear. And if we stretch this out, let's do it. Just dab away along the edges until it nearly disappears into the blue there. And now you can see I'm just playing here, but playing with a purpose. I think that's important. I want to watch what happens when I change the tonal qualities and change the edges and the blending. Okay, so this edge of this cloud is disappearing completely, and of course we can stretch out the other side and so on. Now it still has a certain structure to it. It still has certain volume. We can imagine it having volume, but it's much less solid than what we painted or had painted before. So we can create the change in the object if we change the shapes, the tones, the edges and the marks, the stem. If we change those, we change our subject. What we're looking at here now are a different type of cloud, obviously, and to my memory or knowledge, they're cirrus clouds. In other words, they're very wispy. They're dragged open. They're like almost like taking a piece of cotton wool and teasing it apart, and they become very, very delicate and feathery. So it's an interesting sort of thing here. If you look, and we were talking about those words like shape and tone and edges and marks. With a different set of things as opposed to the previous cloud. And I suppose if you look at this particular cloud, and we said shapes, we could generally say, yeah, well, look, what we realize is that there appear to be a series of lines running almost parallel here, along the edges of the core of the clouds, the main area of the cloud, if you like. So there is some sort of directional pattern to it. So they're not all over the place. They're following a sort of a line, and hopefully you can see my cursor running across the screen in the sort of direction that the current of the air is pulling it. So there is, let's say, a shape. So it gives us a starting point. The tonal situation is different too, because they're generally very subtle in tone. There's not a great dramatic change from dark to light in this occasion anyway, because the previous, which was more cloud, which was, I think, a cumulus type cloud, had a clumpiness to it. Therefore, it was catching the light and the shade more. Whereas these are flatter things. They're thin layers of tissue almost. So the lightness is very similar across the whole thing. And any change that there is in lightness is because it's more transparent. So if you look at the core area of the cloud here, it's quite light because it's slightly thicker. And then what happens is it becomes slightly deeper gray, blue-gray, because basically we're looking through at the blue sky. So it's more transparent and therefore not as intensely light as the other parts. So that's the difference, you know. It's a much more subtle sort of thing going on. The edges, of course, the outer edges of these are very, very soft. They're completely bleeding away in parts very gently. They're, as I say, like a piece of cotton wool. They're sort of teased out. So we've got to be aware of creating that sort of edge when we come to paint it. And finally, marks. Are there any other types of marks or brush marks we would use? How would we do that? And of course, the tendency, and I tend to feel it, you know, we're looking at streaks, or we're looking at long or at least parallel lines rubbed in a similar direction as a way of making marks to create this cloud. Now, that's just our assumption. We're going to try it in a moment and see, but we can break that down just the way we broke the last cloud down and apply this in a slightly different way, and hopefully we'll have a slightly different result as well. So in this case, we're going to work almost in reverse, almost I guess like a watercolor technique, if you like. What we're going to do, I'm using the same set of brushes that I used in the previous sort of demonstration there, but and they will be listed at the start of the video. Okay, what I'm just doing at the moment is I'm just grabbing hold of some various white paint. Again, just white paint, and you'll notice that what I've done is actually take and pre-painted this area blue. So we're going to work on the idea of transparency this time. So that was just a fairly thin coat of, in this case, blue acrylic, but also it could be equally blue oil paint, as long as it's dry. It's very important that you have a dry base. Mine, you can see, is slightly streaky there, but for the purpose of the demonstration and transparency, if you were producing a painting and you were working on a full-scale painting, then you would want this maybe have another coat so that it's a nice, smooth, flat sky type image. Anyway, what we're going to do is start delicately and work back. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually taking zinc white paint, which is a transparent white, a white that's not like a titanium, which is quite opaque. You can use titanium, and we're going to use titanium as we build this up, but and if you don't have zinc white, go ahead and use titanium, but we're looking at very, very, very thin layers, and I'll show you what I mean when I get started here. If I put that is zinc white. As you can see, it looks pretty white, but very quickly as I rub it, it just disappears into the blue, literally. So it just disappears. You can see it's leaving a wee stain behind it of grey. That's literally just it. And that's how transparent this is. I actually might change and for the moment use my good old soft flat brush here, just to maybe get a softer finish. But you can see I'm just rubbing. If you listen, I hope you can hear that, because that's how much I'm rubbing in, because I can see through that white now towards the board itself. So what I can do, when I put the zinc white on it first, you can see it looks quite strong. And I'm having a look at the photograph we looked at to get a rough sort of guideline. I'm not going to follow it absolutely at the moment. I'm going to just get shapes down. But you can see, if you look at the photograph, that I'm creating these shapes, very crude sort of shapes at the minute, very rough looking, And going up a wee bit more there, maybe stretching that a wee bit more, a few dots and things here. You can be quite expressive because let's be honest, clouds don't necessarily, they have form, by the way, and they have structure. That's why you have cirrus and cumulus and cumulonimbus or whatever and all that, but they change. So, you know, if your cloud has a slightly longer bit than someone else's, then it's not going to be not necessarily noticed. There's another little cloud down here streaking there. So again, looks very crude at this point in time. But what we remember saying was we had these parallel sort of lines as a pattern to guide us. Now, as always, or not as always, but often, frequently, I'm going to take that soft brush now. I'm going to tap and soften, especially, and wiping again. But this time, because it's zinc white and because we're using the paint very, very thin, you can see how transparent it's becoming. So you can see I'm clean the brush. If I rub for a long time, it'll disappear. If I rub for a bit of less time, it won't disappear so much. So the result is we'll get all these nice variations of light, depending on how much we want them, you know. Wipe. Practice different marks, watch the photograph and see. As I say, I sensed that the marks were encouraging me to make, you know, dragged marks, but not long dragged marks, short. So until we get this. And of course, as we do this, what happens is the lightness dulls down. In other words, it's not as light because the blue is coming through there. So the first layer we put on here is like watercolor, is a thinner layer, and then we build color on top. Only in this case, we are building towards lighter. So I'm just rubbing away the edges basically with this brush. That's what I'm doing, you know, and I'm just keeping that diagonal line going, that mark going all the way across. And what we're getting is a very, very ghostly looking set of things. And I can slow down and tidy up if I feel I want something neater. There's a good example there, that daubly looking marks. But if I just take now, I've got the brush pushed on, you see, like that, and I'm rubbing with almost the heel of the brush right there, almost the metal bit, just to rub in the pigment or the color into the board. So transparency and layering is important in this case, okay? So we're getting, and then just taking the pressure off. I'm now doing that, brushing the dust off the valuable vase sort of routine there, and a little wisp over here, dragging it, stretching it a little bit. So, you know, we can go on with that as much as we want it to here. And just go back down there and just tidy that up a wee bit. Just going to move the light a wee bit actually, so that just take the sheen off this for you. So you can see, and so it works particularly well with zinc white, you know, at this point. But as I say, if you just rub that a little bit harder, for example, I have titanium white here. Because titanium white is more powerful and not so see-through, what I would tend to use is a stiffer brush. So this is a hog hair brush, or a bristle brush. The reason being we can rub a wee bit with a wee bit more firmness to create that transparency. If I put that's zinc, or pardon me, that's titanium white, and if I put a dot of that on there, it's quite powerful. It's not as thin at all. So therefore, with this, I've cleaned the brush, and with this slightly firmer, I can be quite bold with it. I've got a wee bit of grey on there, but you can see that it will rub it back to a similar degree as the other thing there, but just takes a wee bit more effort, if you like. If we go back to our soft brush here, a soft nylon brush, and what we could do this time is put another little layer of zinc on in the middle area here, and it can be quite so in this middle area, I'm leaving the outer bits that I've worked on, and I'm creating a little, I don't know, rectangle, I suppose, of lighter tone with the zinc white. So in other words, it's thicker, basically. So it's again, looks quite crude at this point. I'm putting it on pretty straight too. There's no medium in it. There's no dilution to this, by the way. That's the other thing. If you can avoid that, it's probably best as well. So we have this shape. We'll have a bit up there, let's say, as well. And we have those two hard bits, rectangular bits. And this time what we're going to do is feather in again, but with a much lighter touch. So in other words, I'm just dragging the edges here. I don't want to disturb the center area so much because I'd like it to stay light, because in the picture there's an area which is a bit lighter than the others. This is the thicker part of the cloud, so therefore we don't want to get rid of that. So we're putting this on top of our last layer. And again, this could be done dry, you know. It might even be more successful, you know, if you are prepared to let the painting dry and then, you know, go back and do this. But at the minute, because it's blending into the previous layer, wet into wet, it's kind of nice, you know. And what we're beginning to get here is this gradation of the illusion that the cloud here is slightly thicker than the clouds out around the outer edges. And I suppose the thing is, we can then decide on where we want our thicker bits. So I could say, well, look, I know there's a little bit there and maybe a little bit here. So just put them on like that, clean the brush up, and then ever so delicately drag that in, and don't over drag it until it's lost, just to the point where you want to stop there, let's say. And then we'll go into this for the moment. Tap the edge there, and then just drag it. I am barely touching the surface. Just be patient, go back and forward. Don't panic and say, oh, I want to get it quickly, and push the brush in hard. Just rubbing or just dragging them by the tips of the nylon brush. And you can see that we'll create that nice slightly thicker area in amongst the other areas. And you'll get that beginning to sense that feeling of stretching out. And you can continue that around all sorts of areas as well. What I'm going to do is I'm putting a piece of, this is titanium white now, just to let you see. So if I was to put a little bit of titanium white here and a wee bit there, okay, over the edge of this flat brush, we think there and there, let's say, and then just clean the brush yet again. Now the brushes are blending tool, and just ever so lightly, same thing, just skim the surface. So it works there with titanium white as well. You might notice it looks slightly brighter. That's because it is just because titanium is not so transparent. It's more powerful white. But dragging, skimming the surface, and we're beginning, you see, to create that variation of the sort of cirrus clouds that you can get. And then, you know, it's up to you. You can decide on, you know, how much feathering you want to do. So for instance, I might take a little bit of light. Again, I'm using titanium here, thicker there, running into a little point there. Look, you know, I could start to get quite detailed about it, you know. So I might say, well, look, let's have a couple of little streaks here. And again, they always look odd when you first put these things on. But then again, when we clean up our brush and then go back in and skim it in, just flick, say, and keep at it. You know, and it's a slower process if you use titanium, because it takes longer to fade into the damp paint below. But, you know, as long as there's movement in the paint, it'll be fine, you know. And you can see there how that's beginning to create a few little very feathery streaks at the outside of it there, okay. And we can keep on doing that right to the edge, a couple of wee bits broken away. Sometimes you get that in clouds where you have a little bit of broken bits like that. And again, drag them, skim them until they're almost disappeared. And then you can go back and you can decide, well, you know, do I want to have more light here, or do I want to change some of these shapes? It was very, that they look like fingers to me, you know, so, you know, part of me kind of wants to break this up a wee bit. I don't like that so much. So you can, you know, say, let's break that up. Again, looks a bit scary to start with, but once I start to force it into the line, that rhythmic sort of line that the rest of the cloud's in, it will slowly but surely melt or meld into the other bits, following that pattern, following the sort of shapes that we want in our various clouds. And you can, again, like we did before, we can change this. We can begin to rub. This is our good old rounded soft nylon brush, and again, you can work into this and change that. So, you know, I can tap that and I'm removing paint. You see this? I'm removing paint because I know the blue paint below is dry. It won't go anywhere, so it's shining through there. You see that? Wiping, removing, and then just dragging it back a bit. Maybe and take a wee bit over here and tap that and then wipe. So we're just picking the paint away there, and then keep on cleaning it and then drag it together. So we've created almost a hole in the cloud there. And you know, so sometimes it's strange because what we're doing is, after all the effort we put in, we're now like taking it off again. But that is the nature of painting. Sometimes you have to create and then you slowly remove again to watch how these things happen, you know. And I'm now dragging with that bigger brush just to force the issue a wee bit, to have a wee bit more wispiness in the cloud. So there's no more paint going on. I'm just playing around with the paint that I've got here to see if I can create some sort of a more dragged out, wispy sort of quality to it. And it is great fun, you know, it's great fun to see it changing as you brush. But as long as you follow the pattern, follow the rhythm, the marks that we've decided to make, and all things are possible. You can take out, look, I'm actually removing, slowly mopping away a little bit there. Create a hole in there, and then just soften the edges around that hole so that it's not as severe. So we're changing the cloud constantly, but yet the paint is really, really thin. You can see there, because of the fact that if I just do that with my brush, you can see it coming away. That's how thin the paint actually is. But no medium, no turpentine, no oil, no liquid or anything like that. But it's a slightly different experience. I remember watching a video about Turner, the great painter, the great artist Turner, who was brilliant at skies and seascapes and all, as you know. And there was an interesting thing. They talked about a technique which he used, and not just him, but many people. And it was a little method of working the brush, and I don't know if I can do this or not, but I'm going to have a go anyway. And you can use this round brush again, this big number 12 or number 14 soft round brush. And I'm actually gonna put just titanium white on it at the moment. And I'll put this up so you can see, by the way. So there's no medium involved still. So you can see what I'm doing is I'm loading a fair bit of paint actually onto the brush. Do you see that? It's gunging up with quite a lot of paint. So that's unlike what we've done so far. But there's a reason for that. And what I'm going to do is just roll the brush. So you can see the brush rolling, twirling it. I go up the way a wee bit and roll it. And maybe there might be enough on it to do one over here. So roll the brush around like that, maybe load it up a wee bit more. Just an experiment, sure, what's the worst that can happen? But it is true, you know. It is we're only trying things. Roll in the brush, and you can see how that creates little broken areas here. Sometimes I'm pushing hard, sometimes I'm lifting the brush up, sometimes I'm pushing down the side. So there's all these wee fiddly different marks by the rolling of the brush. Then, if I take, might be possible to use the same brush or even our good old flat brush here, but I'm going to use the same brush for the moment. I'm going to clean all the paint, or pretty much all the paint off there, and then just work again, tapping this clean brush. I need to wipe it a little bit more actually. I am barely touching the board here, but I'm just working along the chain of the marks that I made there. And actually I'm going to change to the flat brush because I kind of feel a little bit more control with the flat brush. Tapping with the clean flat brush. I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to lose the things that I had there, but you get this lovely chain of, and Turner used and others used this method, especially for sunsets where you have that sliver of golden light, you know. Unfortunately, at the minute I've just got the colors on the palette that I haven't been using, so I can't do that. But you can see that lovely stringy thing going on. I'm going to go back to the round brush and see what I can do with that, with the flat edge of that. Just softening that in slightly, but and you can roll through it several times. You can roll it again, like roll that through, and create all these lovely little feathery clouds. Back to my flat brush again, and actually, you know, it might be an interesting one for some of the bigger, flatter brushes as well. I don't know if I have one here. Probably not at this moment, but we'll go in with what we've got and just dragging around, tapping around the edges of it. Leave the center area middle, just the outer edges. If I just play with that, I'm basically just stretching the edges a little bit with this brush, and you can create these lovely chains of movement and clouds and all sorts. So that was just to show you a little method that a good old Turner, no less, and many others have used, by just simply changing the way you use the brush. Use the natural shape of a brush to create natural lines for you, and then just tidy up. In some cases, I'm not sure if he did that even, but you know, he was such a master that he was able to twirl the brush, and the twirls looked tremendous before he even needed to do what I'm doing here, you know. He knew exactly what the brush was going to do. But anyway, that's just another little thing to have a go at.